My name is Itrin Miller, 34, and I live with my wife Miley in a cozy two-story house in the suburbs of Denver, Colorado. We've been married for 7 years, and until recently, I thought we were happy. It felt like we had a comfortable rhythm. Miley worked from home as a freelance graphic designer, and she developed a new hobby, cooking. Her dishes were amazing, especially the sweets, but as much as I enjoyed them, I tried to avoid overindulging since I worked out regularly. Health was important to me. My office even had an in-house gym, part of my daily routine: work, gym, home. Simple. Miley, though, had changed a little. Over the past few months, she had started gaining weight. I didn't notice at first, but soon it became clear. It wasn't a big deal, at least not to me. But one night, after a steamy session in bed, as we lay in the calm of the aftermath, I made a mistake. A comment I would regret for the rest of my life. "Hey," I said, my voice casual. "Have you noticed you've put on a few pounds? Maybe we could go to the gym together. It could be fun." At that moment, I didn't think much of it, just a suggestion, something to help us bond. But the expression on Miley's face shifted, as if I had lit a fire behind her eyes. She didn't say anything, just rolled over in bed, her back cold and distant. The air between us changed that night, growing heavier with every passing day. At first, I thought it was just a passing mood, but the weeks that followed made it clear I had unknowingly shattered something. Miley's behavior turned darker. She would snap at me over the smallest things, and her laughter, once the light of our home, disappeared. She spent more time alone, either in the kitchen, baking more elaborate sweets, or locked away in her office. I felt her pulling away, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't bridge the distance. I suggested walks together, date nights, anything to rekindle the warmth between us. But every suggestion was met with a cold rejection. Our conversations were minimal, stilted. If it wasn't about logistics or house chores, there was nothing. The Miley I knew, the one who smiled and joked about our future, had vanished. One night, after yet another tense dinner, I found myself lying awake, staring at the ceiling. I realized something. This wasn't a rough patch. This was something more sinister. There was a growing gap between us, and I didn't know how to fix it. A month and a half passed since that ill-fated comment. By then, I was desperate to bring back the Miley I loved. I thought a grand gesture might break the ice. So, one Friday, I decided to surprise her. I pretended to go to work as usual, but I secretly took the day off. I spent the morning planning. I bought her favorite lilies and booked us tickets to the theater show she'd wanted to see. Everything was set. All I had to do was walk through the door and bring joy back into our lives. I parked outside our house just after 1 p.m., my heart racing with excitement. But as I walked toward the front door, I froze. There, through the living room window, I saw a silhouette. A man's silhouette. My heart sank into my stomach. I tried to reason with myself, maybe it was a repairman, or one of her friends. I took a deep breath, pushed the door open quietly, and stepped inside. The house smelled of fresh cookies, the kind Miley had been baking lately. But then, I heard something else. Voices. Laughter. Not just any laugh, Miley's, full of life. A laugh I hadn't heard in months, except it wasn't for me. I moved slowly, my feet feeling like they were dragging through mud. The sounds were coming from upstairs, from our bedroom. As I crept closer, I could hear soft whispers, followed by the unmistakable sound of lips meeting skin. My stomach churned, and my pulse pounded in my ears. No, this couldn't be happening. I pushed the door open slightly, just enough to see them. Miley was on our bed, kissing a man. A stranger. I felt a white-hot surge of rage, shock, and disbelief. Every muscle in my body screamed for me to storm in, to confront them. But I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. Then, Miley looked up and saw me. For a brief moment, her face was filled with surprise. But it quickly morphed into something else: defiance. Cold. Calculated. And then, with icy precision, she uttered words that would haunt me forever. "He thinks I'm fat. He doesn't think I'm fat." Those words. Simple, brutal. This was her revenge. A twisted response to a careless comment. I stumbled back, heartbroken, as her words sliced through me like a knife. The betrayal was complete, but I wasn't done. Not yet. I left the house in a daze, my mind spinning as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. Miley's words echoed in my head, cruel, sharp, deliberate. It felt like someone had ripped the floor out from beneath me, leaving me suspended in a free fall of betrayal. I got into my car and drove. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to get away. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I didn't bother to check it. I knew it was Miley. She had called out after me as I left, her voice almost casual, as if this wasn't a complete destruction of our life together. I wasn't ready to face her. I wasn't even sure if I ever wanted to. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time seemed to blur. Eventually, I found myself parked outside a hotel on the outskirts of town. I booked a room for the night, numb as I handed over my credit card. Inside, the room was small, cold, impersonal. Perfect. I collapsed onto the bed, staring up at the ceiling, replaying everything in my head. Was it my fault? Had I really been so clueless, so insensitive, that I had driven Miley to this? No, I couldn't think like that. Yes, I made a stupid comment, but that didn't excuse what she did. Nothing did. The next morning, I knew I couldn't hide forever. I needed a plan. If Miley was capable of something this spiteful, who knew what else she had in store? I couldn't let her blindside me again. I needed to act, and I needed to do it smartly. My first call was to a lawyer. I didn't mention the affair right away, just asked about divorce proceedings. I needed to understand my options, figure out how to protect myself. The lawyer was calm, professional, and precise. He explained that Colorado is a no-fault divorce state, meaning infidelity wouldn't directly affect the division of property or assets. However, if I could gather proof of her affair, it could give me leverage when negotiating alimony or the settlement. That was my first mission evidence. But I wasn't ready to confront Miley yet. Not until I was prepared, not until I had the upper hand. Over the next few days, I went through the motions of work, keeping my mind occupied with routine. But beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. The pain I felt turned into something else, something darker, more focused. I took the time to freeze our joint accounts, careful to leave enough money for Miley to cover basic expenses so she wouldn't suspect anything right away. I moved the majority of my funds into a personal account, locking her out. I also started gathering any financial documents I could find: mortgage paperwork, savings accounts, investment portfolios. I had paid for most of the house, after all. There was no way she was walking away with it. But that wasn't enough. I needed to ensure that Miley couldn't blindside me again. I started placing small, discreet cameras around the house, nothing too obvious. I wasn't interested in catching more of her affairs. I had already seen more than enough. I just wanted to know what she was up to, what she was planning. If Miley had shown me anything, it was that she could be calculating and cold. I wouldn't put anything past her at this point. Then, I went looking for the man. The guy I had seen in my house. I needed to know who he was. It didn't take long to track him down. Social media made things easier than expected. His name was Jake Harper, a freelance photographer, also married, and based on the few pictures I saw of him and his wife, they seemed happy. But appearances, as I knew all too well, could be deceiving. I wasn't interested in revenge against him, not yet, anyway. But his existence gave me another card to play, another layer to my plan. His wife deserved to know what kind of man she was married to, and when the time came, I would make sure she found out. But first, I needed to handle things with Miley. After a week of preparation, I was ready. I came home one evening, earlier than usual, and found Miley sitting at the dining table, sipping a glass of wine. She didn't look surprised to see me, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She knew. She could sense that something had shifted. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady. She raised an eyebrow, swirling the wine in her glass. "About what?" I could feel my heart racing, but I forced myself to stay calm. This was it. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. "About us. About the future," I said. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "I know about you and Jake." For a second, Miley froze, but then she smiled a slow, mocking grin. "So, you finally grew a spine, huh?" I ignored the jab. "It's over, Miley. I'm filing for divorce." She blinked, and for the first time, I saw a crack in her armor. She hadn't expected that. Not this soon. Miley's smile faltered, and for the first time since that day, I saw something close to fear flicker across her face. She wasn't expecting me to say I was done. Not this quickly. I could tell she had been banking on me being too shocked or devastated to act. But I wasn't playing her game anymore. "You're serious?" she asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm, but the edge of uncertainty was unmistakable. "As serious as you were when you brought him into our bed," I replied, my voice cold. "It's over, Miley. I'm filing for divorce, and you're not getting a thing from me." She placed her wine glass down with a sharp clink, eyes narrowing. "You can't just walk away and leave me with nothing, Itrin. I've been here too. I've sacrificed things for this marriage too. You think you can just dump me and walk away like I don't exist?" Her words were sharp, but I could hear the desperation seeping through. She was starting to realize the consequences of her actions, the reality of what she'd done. It wasn't just about the affair, it was about the life we had built, the home we shared, and the control she was quickly losing. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," I said calmly, watching her carefully. "And trust me, I'll be keeping the house. I paid for most of it, and I've got everything set to make sure you can't take a dime more than what you deserve." Miley stood up now, her eyes blazing. "You think you can outsmart me? You think you can just come in here and throw this in my face without consequences?" I didn't flinch. I'd been preparing for this moment, and her anger didn't shake me. It fueled me. "I know exactly what I'm doing, Miley, and you have no one to blame but yourself." Her face twisted in fury, and for a moment, I thought she might throw the wine glass across the room. But instead, she took a deep breath and leaned forward, trying a different approach. "Listen," she began, her tone softening, almost pleading now. "I was angry, okay? I was hurt. You made me feel like I wasn't good enough, like I wasn't attractive anymore. I didn't mean for things to go this far. It was just, I don't know, a stupid mistake." I raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "A mistake that lasted for weeks? A mistake you brought into our bedroom? Don't insult me, Miley. I saw the way you looked at him. That wasn't a mistake. That was revenge." Her expression hardened again, the mask of sweetness crumbling. "Fine. Yes, it was revenge. You think I didn't hear your little comment about my weight? You think I didn't feel humiliated when you suggested I go to the gym, as if I wasn't good enough for you anymore? You didn't even notice how much I was hurting." I stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. She was right about one thing: I hadn't noticed her pain. But it didn't excuse what she had done. It didn't justify the betrayal, the deceit, the utter disregard for our marriage. "And your response was to ruin our marriage?" I asked, my voice low. "To sleep with someone else because of a stupid comment? You threw everything away for what? To prove a point?" Miley crossed her arms, defiance flashing in her eyes. "Maybe you should have thought about that before you made me feel worthless." I felt a pang of guilt, but I quickly pushed it aside. This wasn't about me anymore. I had made a mistake, sure, but nothing compared to what she had done. The weight of her actions was far greater, and I wasn't going to let her manipulate me into feeling responsible for her decisions. "I've already started freezing our accounts," I continued, watching her reaction closely. "I've gathered all the financial documents, and I'm prepared to take this to court. You won't get the house, Miley. You don't even have a steady job, and most of what you've made from your freelance work isn't enough to claim half of our assets." She looked stunned for a moment, realizing just how far ahead I was. You froze the accounts?" she stammered, her voice breaking slightly. "I did," I said, "and I've got more than enough evidence of the affair, so don't think you can manipulate this situation any further." Miley fell silent, her expression a mixture of disbelief and anger. I could tell she had underestimated me, thought I'd be too broken to fight back. But now that she knew I was serious, she was scrambling to regain control. And that's when I saw the shift in her demeanor, a glint in her eye, something calculating. "You think you're so clever, Itrin," she said, her voice soft but menacing. "But don't forget I know you. I know everything about you, your routines, your weaknesses. And if you think this is going to be a clean break, you're sorely mistaken." I felt a chill run down my spine, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I met her gaze head-on, refusing to back down. I'm not afraid of you, Miley. Maybe you should be, she whispered, her smile returning, but this time, it wasn't mocking. It was dangerous. I left the room, feeling the tension still thick in the air. As I closed the door behind me, I realized something. This wasn't just about a divorce anymore. Miley wasn't going to let this go without a fight, and something told me she was capable of far more than I had anticipated. But neither was I. I was prepared for whatever came next. I stayed out of the house for the next few days, retreating to the hotel again while Miley stewed in her anger. It wasn't just about protecting myself emotionally anymore. I knew Miley was calculating her next move, and I couldn't risk walking blindly into whatever trap she was setting. The cameras I had installed gave me a glimpse of her mood, though they didn't capture much in the way of actions. She spent most of her time either locked in her office or pacing the house, drinking more than usual. The carefree woman I had once known seemed long gone. Then, one night, just as I was reviewing some divorce paperwork, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I think we need to talk. Meet me at the Coffee Pot Cafe tomorrow at noon. Alone. There was no signature, but I didn't need one. It was Jake. My heart raced, but not out of fear, out of a strange, cold excitement. I hadn't anticipated him reaching out, but I was more than willing to see what he wanted. Maybe he was starting to feel the pressure too, or maybe he just wanted to clear the air before things escalated. Either way, I had no intention of backing down. The next day, I arrived at the cafe 10 minutes early, grabbing a seat near the back. It was a small, quiet place, not the type to be crowded. I liked that it meant no scene, no distractions. Just two people with unfinished business. At exactly noon, Jake walked in. He spotted me immediately and made his way over, sliding into the chair across from me without a word. Up close, he looked even more smug than I remembered. He wore a confident smirk, but his eyes were sharp, analyzing me, probably wondering how much I knew or how much I had planned. "I didn't think you'd come," Jake said, leaning back in his chair casually, as if this were a casual meeting between friends. I stared at him for a moment, keeping my expression neutral. "You messaged me. I assumed you had something important to say." Jake smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Straight to the point. "I like that. Look, I'm not here to drag this thing out. What happened between Miley and me, it was a mistake. Things just got out of hand. I figured we could sort this out between us. Keep it clean." I raised an eyebrow, my suspicions confirmed. He was trying to smooth things over, hoping to avoid any consequences. "Keep it clean? You slept with my wife in my own house. I don't think there's any clean way to handle this." His smile faltered for a split second before he recovered, leaning forward now. "I get it. You're angry, and you have every right to be. But I think we both know that things can get messy if we let this go too far. You don't want this to end up in court. Neither of us do. Miley told me you're already filing for divorce. That's fine. But let's not make this more complicated than it has to be." I chuckled bitterly, shaking my head. "You think you're in control here, don't you?" Jake's eyes darkened. "I'm offering you a way out, man. I don't want this to ruin both our lives. I've got my own situation to deal with. I've got a wife too. So, here's the deal. You back off, let this whole thing die quietly, and I'll make sure Miley doesn't push for more than her share. We both walk away without getting dragged through the mud." I stared at him, letting the silence stretch between us. He had no idea how deep I had already prepared for this, no idea how much leverage I had. And now, he was offering me a way out? The audacity of it almost made me laugh. "I appreciate your concern, Jake," I said slowly, leaning forward to meet his gaze. "But you're not in a position to bargain with me. You see, while you've been playing this little game with Miley, I've been gathering everything I need. I've frozen our accounts, I've got evidence of the affair, and I've already spoken to a lawyer who's more than prepared to take this to court if necessary." Jake's smirk faltered again, and I could see the fear starting to creep in. He hadn't expected me to be this far ahead, hadn't expected me to fight back. "You're bluffing," he said, his voice lower now, but I could hear the uncertainty in it. "Am I?" I replied, pulling out my phone and scrolling to the file with all the evidence I had gathered. Photos, text messages, everything Miley hadn't bothered to hide because she assumed I wouldn't find out. I pushed the phone across the table to Jake. He picked it up, his face draining of color as he swiped through the images. I could see the sweat starting to form on his brow, and his hands trembled slightly as he put the phone back down. "I don't need this to go public," I said, my voice steady and calm. "But if you think for 1 second that I'm going to let this go without consequences, you're delusional. Miley and I are done, but I'm making sure she gets exactly what she deserves, and you? Well, let's just say your wife might be getting a little surprise soon, too." Jake's face twisted into a mask of anger, but he didn't speak. He knew I had him cornered. There was no way out for him now. "I suggest you go home and start getting your own affairs in order," I said, standing up from the table. "Because once this all hits, you're going to need to be prepared." "I'll make sure of that." I didn't give him a chance to respond. I turned and walked out of the cafe, feeling the rush of adrenaline pumping through me. The confrontation had gone exactly as I'd hoped. Jake was rattled, and now he knew I wasn't some clueless victim. I was ready for whatever Miley, or he tried to throw at me next. But deep down, I also knew that Miley wasn't finished. She wasn't the type to back down without a fight. And with Jake crumbling under pressure, I had a feeling that she would get desperate. Desperate people were dangerous, unpredictable. The game was just getting started, and I had to be ready for anything. The day after my meeting with Jake, I felt a strange mix of triumph and unease. While I'd successfully rattled him, I knew the real threat wasn't him, it was Miley. Jake was predictable, driven by fear of losing his comfortable life. But Miley? She had already shown how far she was willing to go. Her next move was coming, and I had to be ready for whatever she threw my way. I spent most of the day at work, trying to focus, but my mind kept drifting back to the confrontation at the cafe. I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was brewing. Miley had been too quiet lately. The cameras I'd placed around the house hadn't caught anything suspicious, but her silence was louder than any shouting match we'd ever had. That evening, I got home around 7 p.m. The house was dimly lit, the smell of Miley's baking lingering in the air. It felt eerie, almost like walking into a trap. As I stepped inside, I noticed her sitting at the dining table, her posture relaxed, a glass of wine in her hand. She was waiting for me. "I was wondering when you'd show up," she said, her voice casual, but her eyes gleamed with something darker. "We need to talk." I could feel my heart rate pick up, but I kept my face neutral. "What's this about, Miley? We've said all there is to say." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, I think there's still plenty left to say. You see, I've been thinking about our little situation, and I've come to some conclusions." I crossed my arms, standing a few feet from the table, not wanting to sit down. "And what conclusions are those?" Miley swirled her wine, taking a slow sip before setting the glass down. "I know you're trying to box me in with this divorce. Freezing the accounts, talking to your lawyer, gathering evidence like some wannabe detective. But you've forgotten one thing, Itrin." I didn't respond, just waited, my mind racing as I tried to anticipate her next move. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a near whisper, but each word cut like a blade. "I know your secrets too." My stomach lurched. For a split second, I couldn't breathe. Secrets? What was she talking about? I had been careful, hadn't I? "You're bluffing," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but I could hear the crack in it. "Am I?" Miley tilted her head, her smile widening. "You've always been good at hiding things. I'll give you that. But did you really think I wouldn't notice?" I clenched my jaw, refusing to let her see me flinch. "Notice what, Miley? You're grasping at straws." She stood up slowly, walking around the table, stopping just a few feet from me. "That job of yours. The long hours at the gym. Those nights you came home late, smelling like you'd been anywhere but the office. I wondered for a while if you had a little secret of your own." I blinked, my heart now pounding in my chest. No, this couldn't be happening. Miley couldn't know. I hadn't done anything wrong, or at least nothing she could pin on me. "You're insane," I spat, trying to deflect, but my mind was spinning. Did she really believe I had been unfaithful? Or was this another one of her mind games? Miley's smile was sharp as a knife. "You think I don't know about her? That blonde at your office? What's her name again? Lauren?" I froze. Lauren. The project manager I'd been working with for months. We'd been spending extra hours together at work, But nothing had happened. At least, not yet. There had been moments, glances, lingering conversations, but I hadn't crossed that line. I wouldn't have. Miley took my silence as confirmation. She laughed, low and dangerous. You should see your face right now. Priceless. I gritted my teeth. There's nothing between Lauren and me. You're reaching. Oh, please, Miley said, rolling her eyes. Do you think I haven't seen the texts? The late-night work chats? Come on, Itrin. You're not as squeaky clean as you think. I could make this whole thing a lot messier for you if I wanted to. She was bluffing. She had to be. There was nothing in those messages that would suggest an affair. But the mere fact that she was throwing this at me meant she was desperate, and desperation made people dangerous. What do you want, Miley? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. I want my share, she said simply, leaning against the back of the chair. I'm not walking away from this marriage empty-handed, and I'm certainly not going to let you paint me as the villain while you play the victim. I stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. She wasn't here to beg or apologize. She was here to negotiate. Miley had always been clever, too clever. She knew how to play people, how to twist the situation to her advantage. And now, she was trying to corner me. You think threatening me is going to get you what you want? I asked, my voice cold. I think it'll make you think twice about trying to screw me over in court, she replied smoothly. I don't want a war, Itrin, but if you push me, I'll push back. Hard. I hated that she was right. As much as I wanted to believe I had the upper hand, Miley knew how to manipulate, how to spin things in her favor. If she convinced people that I'd been unfaithful, even without proof, it could complicate the divorce, muddy the waters in ways I hadn't anticipated. But I wasn't about to back down. You're not getting the house, I said firmly, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. Miley shrugged. We'll see. But if you keep playing this game with me, I'll make sure everyone knows about Lauren. And trust me, once that rumor gets out, it'll stick. I swallowed hard, my mind racing through the possibilities. She was playing dirty, and I had underestimated just how far she would go to get what she wanted. But I had one final card left to play. Jake, I said, watching her closely. Miley's smile faltered for the briefest moment. She recovered quickly, but I saw the flash of panic in her eyes. I'd struck a nerve. What about him? She asked, her tone icy. I spoke to him, I said, stepping closer, refusing to let her intimidate me. He's terrified, Miley. He knows I've got all the evidence I need, and so does his wife. You think you're in control, but you've got a lot more to lose than I do. Her face tightened, the cracks in her mask beginning to show. I could see her weighing her options, trying to calculate her next move. She wasn't as confident as she wanted me to believe. You're bluffing, she whispered, but this time, it was her voice that wavered. Try me, I replied, my voice low and steady. You want to take this to court? Fine. Let's see how Jake feels when his wife leaves him. Let's see how you feel when you're left with nothing. The silence between us was electric, charged with tension. Miley's grip on her glass tightened, but she didn't speak. She didn't have to. I could see the fear in her eyes, the realization that she might not win this game after all. Without another word, I turned and walked upstairs, leaving Miley standing there, alone with her wine and her shattered plans. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet creaks of the house settling. Miley hadn't come upstairs. After our confrontation, I heard her pacing downstairs for a while before the sound of a door slamming echoed through the house. The tension was palpable, but I felt something shift in my favor. She wasn't as invincible as she'd led me to believe. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. I got up, showered, and dressed for work, half expecting some sort of confrontation, but there was nothing. No slamming doors, no angry glares, just silence. It almost made me more uneasy than if she had yelled at me. As I grabbed my keys and headed out, I saw a note on the kitchen counter. Miley's neat handwriting stood out starkly on the small piece of paper. Gone for the weekend. Don't wait up. I stared at the note, feeling a strange mix of relief and suspicion. A weekend away? That wasn't like her. Miley didn't just leave, not without a fight, not without making sure she had the last word. I couldn't help but wonder what she was really up to. Still, I wasn't going to waste the opportunity. With her gone, I could finally breathe. No more walking on eggshells, no more worrying about the next twisted game she'd throw my way. At least for a few days. But as much as I wanted to relax, something gnawed at me, something felt off. Miley had been too calm last night, too calculated. She wasn't one to retreat easily. I knew she was up to something. I just didn't know what. By Saturday afternoon, I couldn't take the unease anymore. I pulled up the feed from the cameras I'd hidden around the house, hoping for some kind of clue. The footage showed nothing unusual, just Miley packing a bag, her face set in stone. She hadn't touched my things, hadn't left any notes other than the one I found. It all seemed so normal, too normal. Then, a thought hit me. If she was planning something, it wouldn't be happening at the house. It would be elsewhere, wherever she was spending her mysterious weekend. I debated tracking her, but I decided against it. I couldn't follow her everywhere, and besides, I didn't need to stoop to that level. I'd let her make her move. I'd be ready. Instead, I shifted my focus. I needed to solidify my position, to ensure that when things finally exploded, I wouldn't be left vulnerable. I reached out to my lawyer, filling him in on the latest developments. I also made another call, the one I had been sitting on for days. Jake's wife, Claire. I hesitated for a moment, phone in hand, thinking about the chaos this would cause. But then I remembered the smug look on Miley's face, the threats, the manipulation. This wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about protecting myself from whatever disaster Miley was trying to orchestrate. Claire deserved to know, and if Miley thought she could use Jake to hurt me, she was in for a rude awakening. The phone rang twice before a soft voice answered. Hello? Hi, Claire, I began, my voice steady but tight. My name is Miller. I'm not sure how to say this, but I think you need to know what's been going on between Jake and my wife, Miley. There was a pause on the other end. I could almost hear Claire's world crashing down around her in the silence. What are you talking about? She finally asked, her voice sharp with suspicion and fear. I have proof, I said, feeling my grip tighten on the phone. I didn't want to believe it at first, but Jake and Miley have been having an affair. I've got pictures, texts, everything. I'm sorry to drop this on you, but you deserve to know. Another long silence followed, and for a moment, I thought she had hung up. But then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, Send me the proof. I exhaled, the tension easing just a bit. I'll send it now. After we hung up, I sent the photos and screenshots I'd gathered. The evidence was irrefutable, and I knew it would devastate her. Part of me felt guilty for pulling her into this mess, but the other part, the part that had been betrayed and lied to, knew it was necessary. I couldn't afford to let Jake and Miley keep the upper hand. It didn't take long for Claire to respond. Thank you. I had no idea. I'll deal with this. Short, simple, and to the point. I could only imagine what was happening on her end, whether Jake had been confronted yet, whether their marriage was already falling apart. But I couldn't dwell on it. I had to stay focused on Miley. By Sunday afternoon, I still hadn't heard from her. The house remained silent, and my phone stayed stubbornly devoid of any messages or calls from her. It was unnerving, but I knew that her silence meant she was planning something. The calm before the storm. When Miley finally returned that evening, it was almost as if nothing had happened. She came through the door, tossed her bag on the floor, and poured herself a glass of wine without so much as a glance in my direction. I watched her, waiting for the next move, but she didn't acknowledge me. The tension was suffocating, like we were both standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting to see who would fall first. I decided not to push. Not yet. Let her believe she was still in control. But as the week went on, it became clear that something had shifted. Miley had stopped picking fights, stopped with the passive-aggressive comments. Instead, she moved through the house like a ghost, barely speaking to me, spending more and more time locked in her office or out of the house entirely. It was unsettling, but I couldn't let my guard down. Whatever she was planning, I knew it was coming soon. Then, on Thursday evening, as I sat in the living room going over more divorce paperwork, Miley appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. I think we should talk, she said. I looked up, meeting her gaze, ready for whatever game she was about to play. About what? About us. About the divorce. I set down the papers, giving her my full attention. I thought we'd already said everything that needed to be said. Miley walked into the room, sitting down on the couch across from me. She crossed her legs, her posture calm but deliberate. I've been thinking, maybe we've both been too hasty. Maybe there's a way we can resolve this without tearing each other apart. I stared at her, trying to read between the lines. This wasn't an olive branch. This was strategy. What are you getting at? I asked, my voice measured. Miley's smile was thin, calculated. I think we can come to an agreement that benefits both of us. You keep the house, and I'll take a fair share of the savings. We can keep this civil. No need to drag it out in court. I narrowed my eyes, suspicion prickling at the back of my mind. And what's the catch? There's no catch, Itrin, she said, her voice sweet but laced with something more sinister. But if you push me well, let's just say things might get ugly. For both of us. Her threat hung in the air, and for the first time in a while, I saw the real Miley, the one who had been hiding behind that calm exterior. She wasn't offering peace. She was offering terms, and they were on her terms alone. I leaned forward, locking eyes with her. You want to make a deal, Miley? Fine. But let me be clear, you're not walking away from this as easily as you think. I've already made sure of that. Her smile faltered, and I knew I had struck a nerve. The storm was coming, and I was ready to face it head-on. Miley's smile faded as we sat there, locked in a silent battle of wills. She had underestimated me from the start, thinking her manipulation would be enough to break me down. But now, she was beginning to realize that this wasn't going to end the way she'd imagined. I stood up, my movements slow and deliberate. You want to make things ugly, Miley? Go ahead. But don't think for a second that I haven't been prepared for this. Whatever game you're playing, I'm always 2 steps ahead. Her eyes flickered with something between anger and fear, but she kept her composure. Is that so? She asked, standing up as well, her voice low. You think you've got everything figured out? I stepped closer, lowering my voice so that only she could hear. I already told Jake's wife. She knows everything, and from what I've heard, she's not sticking around. Miley's face paled. I knew she hadn't expected that. She thought she could use Jake as a pawn, but now the pieces were falling apart around her. If Claire left Jake, his life would implode, and whatever leverage Miley thought she had would be gone. That's not going to change anything, she said, though her voice had lost some of its venom. You still don't have the proof to ruin me. You're bluffing, Itrin. I took a step back, letting her words hang in the air. Bluffing? You really think so? She didn't answer, but I could see the doubt creeping in. She knew she was losing control, and she didn't know how to stop it. Miley had always thrived on power, on being the one who pulled the strings. But now, the strings were unraveling. I've got more than enough to drag you through court, I continued, watching her carefully. And if you think you're going to walk away with a fair share, you're delusional. You're going to lose, Miley. The house, the money, everything. And when it's all over, you'll be left with nothing. For a moment, there was silence. Miley stood there, her breathing shallow, her eyes darting as if she was calculating her next move. But I could see the cracks in her armor. She was out of cards to play. Then, something in her snapped. You bastard, she screamed, her voice echoing through the house. She grabbed the nearest object, a glass of wine, and hurled it at me. I barely had time to react as it shattered against the wall, red liquid splattering everywhere like blood. She advanced on me, her face twisted in fury. You think you can ruin me? You think you can just walk away after everything I've given you? I've sacrificed for you, Itrin. I've put up with your condescending attitude, your judgment, your stupid gym routine. And for what? So you can throw me aside like trash? I stood my ground, watching as she unleashed all the pent-up rage she had been holding back. It was like watching a dam break, the floodwaters spilling over in a chaotic torrent. I gave you everything, she screamed, her voice cracking. I tried to make you happy, but you were never satisfied. You think I didn't notice how you looked at me, how you talked down to me? I was never enough for you, was I? I felt a pang of guilt, but I quickly buried it. This wasn't about what I had or hadn't done. This was about her betrayal, her manipulation. She had chosen this path, not me. Miley, I said, my voice calm but firm. You did this. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them. Her eyes blazed with hatred, and for a second, I thought she might hit me. But instead, she collapsed into the chair behind her, burying her face in her hands. I could hear her sobbing, her body shaking with the weight of her emotions. I never wanted it to end like this, she choked out between sobs. I just wanted to feel like I mattered to you again. The room was filled with the sound of her broken sobs, and for a moment, I felt the weight of our entire relationship come crashing down. The years we had spent together, the moments of happiness, the dreams we once shared, it all felt so distant now, like a story that belonged to someone else. I sighed, the anger draining from me. Miley, we could have fixed things, but you made your choice when you brought Jake into this. You crossed a line I can't forgive. She didn't look up, just sat there, crying into her hands. I felt a strange sense of closure washing over me. This was the end. The final blow had been dealt, and there was no turning back. After a long silence, Miley finally lifted her head, her tear-streaked face filled with defeat. So what now? She asked, her voice small. I looked at her, feeling nothing but exhaustion. Now, we end this. I'll talk to the lawyer. We'll settle this as cleanly as we can. You'll get your share, but don't expect anything more. No house, no lavish payout, just what's fair. She nodded, her eyes hollow. The fight had left her, and for the first time in months, I saw the real Miley, the one who had once loved me, the one I had loved. But that person was gone now, buried beneath the wreckage of lies and betrayal. I turned and walked toward the door, ready to leave the room and the chaos behind me. As I reached for the handle, Miley spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. Do you still hate me? I paused, my hand hovering over the doorknob. I didn't turn around, but I answered her truthfully. I don't hate you, Miley. I just don't love you anymore. And with that, I left. The divorce was finalized a few months later. True to my word, Miley got a fair settlement, but nothing more. She didn't fight me in court, didn't drag things out. She seemed to accept her fate, resigned to the consequences of her actions. Jake, as I had predicted, didn't fare so well. His wife left him, and from what I heard, his life spiraled into chaos. Karma, I suppose. As for me, I kept the house, started to rebuild my life. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the weight of everything felt overwhelming. But I knew, deep down, that I was better off. Miley had been a part of my life for a long time, but her betrayal had shown me who she really was. And now, I could finally move on. I never heard from Miley again after the divorce. Sometimes, I wondered what became of her, if she ever found the happiness she had been searching for. But I never reached out. That chapter of my life was closed. Looking back, I don't regret how things ended. I don't regret standing up for myself, for fighting back when Miley tried to tear me down. It hurt, yes, but in the end, I was free. And that, more than anything, was the sweetest revenge. Discover more stories. Subscribe today.